Thank you. Very happy to be here. Thank you so much.
Our next guest is the current president and CEO of the New America Foundation. She was formerly the Burt G. Kerstetter 66 University Professor of Politics and International Affairs at Princeton University and Dean of its Woodrow Wilson School of Public and International Affairs. She is an academic, a foreign policy analyst, and a public commentator, and she served as Director of Policy Planning for the U.S. State Department from 2009 to 2011 under U.S. Secretary of State Hillary Clinton. Joining my colleague, Real Simple editor Kristen Van Ogtrop, please welcome the president and CEO of New America Foundation and also writer of an influential article and book you may have heard of, AnneMarie Slaughter.
Here. So in addition to that impressive bio, I also have to give you one other little fact about AnneMarie. She is full of genius tips. For example, she had her tailor sew a pocket on the inside of her dress for a mic. So for anyone on here who's ever mic'd, I mean, amazing, right? And I'm the editor of Real Simple, and I find that really amazing. So from the ridiculous to the sublime,
yes, exactly.
So AnneMarie, you wrote an article that probably, at least 80% of this room read, called Why Women Can't Have It All 3 years ago.
Still can't have it all.
Still can't have it all. Which shut down the Atlantic's website for a time, the 5th most read article in the history of the Atlantic, and the Atlantic is quite an old publication. So I was here when you came to the summit after that article came out, I don't know, well, I guess like 2 or 3 years ago.
Yeah.
And whoever interviewed you, and because I have trouble balancing my professional and personal life, I can't remember who interviewed you, asked you, or asked the audience, who agreed with AnneMarie's message in that article. And I was, as I told you backstage, I was like waving at you, I think. But I was surprised actually at how few women in this audience raised their hands. It was probably about half the room. And I know you talked about that a little bit at the time. Now you have just published Unfinished Business, which is obviously, it's a book. It's a much expanded look at some of the issues you explored in Why Women Still Can't Have It All. But, in thinking about this audience here today, super successful, very influential, very powerful women, do you think that your message in the article and now in your book is controversial to women like this? And if so, why?
Thanks for the question. And I'm thrilled to be back. I've actually been here since pretty much the beginning. But yes, I think many of the women in this room and the women who've come over the years, and I've always come too, either did not understand what I was trying to say, and I explain in the book that the title of that article was not my doing, in part precisely because I now get introduced as, this is AnneMarie Slaughter. She says women can't have it all, and my whole life has been dedicated to the opposite proposition. What I was trying to do was to say, here's what we still need to do if we're really going to get to equality between men and women. I think many women didn't understand what I was trying to say, and I think many other women, including many of you in this room, may have read me as saying, you can't do it, or certainly telling our daughters you can't do it, which was also not what I was trying to say. And I will say that, I write in the book that I meet women, and some number of senior successful women kind of get a tightening in their jaw when they talk to me. And I feel like saying, you didn't understand, and I'm not trying to do what you think I'm trying to do. What I'm trying to do is to say, and I did say this before, for all of you who are here, remember the women who were in business school with you who are not here, and why. And it isn't just because they didn't lean in. And I want to say right here in the book, I make absolutely clear that I admire what Cheryl's doing, And not only do I admire it, I've seen it, right? I've seen young women come and ask me for raises, and I know they read Lean In. And, I say in the book, I tip my hat to Sheryl Sandberg when that happens. I don't always give them the raise, but I really do appreciate the fact that they were willing to ask. But that's part of it. But the part that I think was true for so many of the women who aren't here, and maybe for some of you, is that no matter how ambitious we are, we can hit a tipping point. I hit a tipping point. My kid had a really rocky adolescence, and I was working in a different city at a job where there's no, there's no flexibility at the Assistant Secretary of State level. And I hit a tipping point, and many other women have, and a growing number of men, and we need to accommodate that too. So it's both and, not either or, and I do hope this book will clear up some of those misconceptions.
Okay, so speaking of Sheryl Sandberg, there were a couple of articles just in the last couple of weeks leading up to this summit, revealing recent research about women and women's desire to reach the top of their professions. And there was one, the Wall Street Journal did a piece at the end of September revealing the findings of a leanin.org and McKinsey study of 30,000 men and women. And I want to read you a little quote from the beginning of the article, and I want you to respond to it. Women aren't abandoning their careers in large numbers. Women overall don't lack for ambition and confidence that they can take on big jobs. Yet when asked whether they want a top role in their companies or industries, a majority of women say they would rather not grab the brass ring. So how do you think that's, well, I mean, the Wall Street Journal and Lean.org and McKinsey would say demonstrably that's true, but how do you respond to that, and how does that dovetail or not with the message that you're trying to send?
So I actually hear that differently, and when I talk to women who say that, what they're actually saying is, I don't want to grab the brass ring yet, right? If you tell them that they can actually be at home or work flexibly, when I say be at home, most of us are working and taking care of other people, that they can enjoy that period of their lives and then take the big job, they want it. Most of them think that's a trade-off, and many of them don't want to make that particular trade-off. And I have to say, that was my choice, right? I never, ever thought I would turn down the opportunity to be promoted to a job like the one Samantha Power has, and she's, you're going to hear from her, and it's an unbelievably great job. But I was not willing to give up the last 4 years that my kids were at home. I just wasn't. I wanted to look back at the end of my life and say, I lived that part of my life to the fullest. So I do think, and for some jobs, that's not an option. You just got to go for it. But we actually could create a society in which it would be perfectly possible to say, for women and men, okay, the period between 30 and 50 or 35 and 50 odd, depending when you have kids, that period you're still gonna rise, but you're gonna sort of do things that still allow you to be in control more of your life. And then when you're ready, you're gonna go for the big job. And there's no reason we can't do that.
So Samantha Power has really young kids.
She does.
And she's pretty young.
She is. She was my student.
Yeah. Although, she did an event with Real Simple and Time a couple of weeks ago, and she said one of the things that makes her job okay now is she knows it's going to end.
Yes.
And so do you think that if she had a different kind of job where it just stretched out forever in front of her, it would be a harder road to face?
I do. I think a couple things. One, I think it's easier with young kids rather than teenagers. And that's one of the messages people used to tell me, and I didn't want to hear it. Because when my kids were young, I thought, it can't get harder than this. Do not tell me it's harder. Yeah. But in fact, it's different hard, right? You got plenty of time to work, with teenagers, they don't want to talk to you most of the time. Mm-hmm. But when they do want to talk to you, you have to be there. So I actually think with young kids, at least when you come home, they want to see you, right? Yeah. They're excited that you're coming home. I do also think your point's a very good one. When young women say to me, should I go in to work for the National Security Council? I say, absolutely. It's really important for your resume, but know that you're not going to see your family, and know that it will end, and plan on it ending. Do it for 1 year or 2 years, check that box, be ready then to go into a higher job later. But that makes a big difference than taking, in my case, most of the jobs I'm up for that are really big are 10-year jobs, and that means, I really have to
Forever.
hand myself over to somebody else for
Right.
that period of time.
Okay, so I want to take some questions or comments. Okay. I've been instructed I have to wait for the mic, and I actually have to choose. I don't choose a person, I choose a mic. Okay, so.
Hi, AnneMarie.
Hey, Maxine.
Maxine Clark from St. Louis. What policies, if any, do you think are the most important for us as a country to implement that might help support both men and women being more successful in their work?
That's great. Thanks. So I do think we have to do this together. It's the last part of the book that says, as important as it is to do things in our workplaces as bosses, one woman and one CEO at a time, there's a lot of this we cannot do alone. And I think it's time to face that. I think it's time to see that paid family leave, let's start with that. And cities around the country, Cincinnati was the most recent, are starting to do this on their own. They are not waiting for the federal government. I live in New Jersey. We have paid family leave. It's part of a payroll tax. It is perfectly doable. We have to have paid family leave. The women at the bottom are losing jobs when they can't take time out to accommodate a sick child, a sick spouse, whatever it is. So paid family leave is essential. And then maternity and paternity leave. You just heard Mary say her husband is a lead parent. Many of us can't make it without lead parent husbands. One of the things I'd say to all of you, if you have a lead parent husband, celebrate him and tell younger women that's how you're doing it. Be honest, right? And let's say those guys are the pioneers. They are just as much pioneers as the women 10 years ahead of me who broke the mold for women. Those guys are breaking the mold for men. So we need maternity. Thank you. We need maternity and paternity leave, and then we need quality, affordable childcare and elder care. Actually, it's an elder boom that's as big as children. But for our children, and this isn't just to support women, we now know that the first 5 years of a child's life, you are not just teaching that child stuff. You're shaping that child's brain. You are determining what he or she will learn for the rest of his or her life. I don't think there's any more important work for that. As a foreign policy person, as an economic policy person, that's a national security issue, that's a competitiveness issue, and we as a country should say, look, we are going to invest in quality, affordable childcare. So those three things.
Yep, question in the back?
Hi, AnneMarie. I'm Tanya O'Connor from Univision. Thank you so much for sharing your story. I can, on many levels, relate. I have a 16, 13, and 8-year-old. Wow. And I think for many of us in this room, when we face challenges with the children, we have a lot of resources. We want to throw that at the problem and think it's going to fix it, but sometimes they just need us. And I really appreciate you sharing that. I'm so curious, now that you're on the other side of it, what have your boys, have they reacted to all of this? And have they said thanks, and do they appreciate what you've done?
Right, now might be a good time to talk about parenting by text.
Yes,
actually.
exactly. Yes, so that's the first thing I was going to say. I love the assumption I'm on the other side of this. I've got a 16-year-old, and as you know, who is in junior year, who is taking SATs in 2 weeks, and I was telling Kristen before, I am now parenting by text, right? That is what I do. I spend half the day seemingly with my thumbs dispensing advice, asking about how his grades are. I'm sort of letting him know I may not be physically there, but boy, am I virtually there. But for the elder, the son I wrote about in the article, and when he went on college tour, he kept saying, I feel like I'm that kid, with a sign around it. But he started college this fall, and both of it, I drove him to college, and it was fantastic. He's at Northwestern in Chicago, and he is both proud of me and proud of the role that I've played, but he's equally proud of the idea that Andy wrote an article saying he was the lead parent. And part of what both sons, I think is they are going to be part of expanding roles and choices for men, and that this is part of what now has to happen. So, most of the time they're mostly concerned with themselves, but when they do, lift their head up and notice that what other things, I'd say yes. I'd say, they're very proud.
One of the things, in reading reviews of your book, several people described you as optimistic.
Yes.
And one of the things that made me feel optimistic in reading the book is some of the data you give about millennial men and their attitudes towards, combining work and family. Could you talk about that a little bit?
Yep. So, in the broadsheet, if you were reading, I think it was Monday, there was this Bain study that reveals that 50% of MBA men expect to put family ahead of career at some point. Now that is an enormous change. And it's an enormous change and a very good one, because again, we actually need to have it so that women and men are, if to the extent they have to, not everybody has to, but many of us do, need to make those trade-offs about putting family ahead of career. This is particularly important if men are going to support women, right? So part of what I say in the book is, here's the conversation you need to have, or in this room probably your daughters need to have, if they're about to settle with a mate. And it isn't, will you support my career? Mm-hmm. It is, if I get a promotion, will you move for me? Right? Those are the kinds of questions that get at the trade-offs that you actually have to make. Any of you who are sitting here know this. It can't just be, I'll support your career as long as it doesn't affect mine, because that's not going to be how it works. So I am very encouraged. I think millennial men want a much bigger role in their families, want to have a relationship with their children that is much more active than their fathers had, and also want to support their wives with, as I say, with care as well as cash. This doesn't mean they won't have careers too. It just means we'll all be making these trade-offs.
Shelley.
Hi, Kristen. Shelley Brindle from HBO, and AnneMarie, I have also been very intrigued by so much of what you have written. And the conversation that always stumps me is, there's a conversation we talk about policy, which I think you talk a lot about, right? There's a lot we talk about lean in, about women. But we don't talk about is the need for the jobs to evolve, to accommodate these things that don't require, that actually reward the trade-offs as opposed to penalizing people.
Yes.
And I think there needs to be a disruption of the conversation that's a bit different than what's been had today. And the one example I gave when I ran a team and we first implemented remote time and flex time, I mandated everybody on my team take it. It wasn't an option. And what it did, it took the gender bias out of those that wanted to take it. And I also wanted to prove if you have a culture that's really rewarded by output and productivity, it wasn't about where and when you did your job.
Absolutely.
And I think the conversation, even about like, oh, well, just know if this is the job, you're never going to see your family. I think the conversation needs to change a bit about how those jobs need to change and rewarded differently, output that's rewarded as opposed to the traditional male definitions of success.
I am so glad you asked that question, because that's the third thing I wanted to say to all of you. And exactly, one of the things I say, when I left the State Department, people described me as having opted out or dropped out. Dropped out? Really? I was a full-time professor at Princeton, also writing and speaking around the country. What I did was to move from inflexible intensive work to flexible intensive work. And it made all the difference. I could work more than full time. It's just, I could do it remotely. I could do it where I was. I could do it when I needed it. So absolutely, we need to get to what I call deep flexibility. And you put your finger on it. It's results-oriented management, right? It's when I want you to do this work by this time of this quality, and you can do that. You can't never come into the office, definitely not, but it's really about the work. It's not about where and how you do it, which is also something millennials want, right? They don't really understand why they can't work wherever they are. So there's a whole set of ways in which we can change the workplace to make it deeply flexible. I think your idea of making it the default is hugely important. At New America, we have 6 weeks paid time off a year. But you have to use 4 weeks of that, right? You can only roll over 2 weeks a year, because I want people to take time out, and I model that as well. The other piece of this is you've got to fight flexibility stigma, right? So in so many places, you've got these policies. That's not the issue. The issue is if you take it, you're not a player. Right? If you work part-time, if you work remotely, all of that, you are not a player. And that's stigma. That's saying if you work differently, you're not as smart, you're not as committed to your career. That's ridiculous. It's about the work. The last thing I'll say there in terms of just the talent pool and the way I think we need to change the work conversation, there is an enormous pool of talented women out there between 45 and 55 they are ready to go. Their kids have left the house. They were educated with all of you. They took time out, and boy, are they ready to go. On the speaking circuit, that is what I get over and over again. Women coming up and saying, I am so ready. And, you know, they're 52 or 53 or even 55. Hillary will be 70 if she wins. Why aren't we hiring these people? Why aren't we giving them returnships, which is what Morgan Stanley and Goldman Sachs have pioneered? Why aren't we taking advantage of that talent? And that's, again, a way of saying, you can do this.
Okay, so we could talk about this all day, but I'm really getting like the hook over here from Sasha. So, so thank you so much for being here. Thank you all for the excellent questions, and
thank you.
Good luck with the
Thanks
book.
so much.